Hello and welcome back to another episode of Fully Booked, the Hidden Gems author podcast, in which Craig Touch and myself, Roland Hume, chat some of the interesting figures and leading lights of this crazy industry of writing and publishing. And today we're delighted to have a very special writer join us who I am dying to hear from, Mr. JD Barker, who, well, first of all, JD, how are you doing? Welcome to Fully Booked.
I'm doing great. Welcome to Monday. You're my first interview of the week, so I better not screw it up.
Well, hopefully we'll be the best interview of your week. But that's up to Craig, the man himself, who we wouldn't be here without. Craig, how are you doing today?
I'm doing well, although I was just looking at my calendar. I was like, is it Monday? I thought it was Tuesday. I was off last week, and then I worked on the weekend, so it's all, sort of blending together for me. So yeah, thanks for coming on. I know that so you write thriller novels, right? And you've, I guess, recently released one, and you've sort of are pushing it out now and doing it globally. Is that what's going on?
Yeah, so I'm one of those authors that agents and editors hate, because I knew from the get-go I didn't want to get stuck in that genre box. And I worked in the industry for about 20 some years behind the scenes. So I talked to a bunch of friends of mine that had been doing this for a while. And I kept seeing the same problem over and over again. Like, somebody would write a book, it would hit really hard. And before they knew it, they were stuck writing that same book, but different every year for like the rest of their life. And that scared me. I didn't want to get caught up in Groundhog Day. So I purposely came out of the gate. I started with a horror novel. Then I wrote a thriller, then I wrote another horror novel, and I've been bouncing back and forth between genres for about 11 years now. And at the very beginning, everybody in the industry pushed back because they don't quite know how to sell that. But I had studied all the major authors before, embarking on my own. And I looked at the brands that they created and how they created them. So I knew I was on the right track. And about 3-4 years, things shifted. And I got a phone call from my editor. They had noticed that people were, even though they were in Spain, they were only publishing my thrillers. People wanted the horror novels. Like they wanted the rest of the back catalog. So slowly, people started migrating from this genre to that genre and just kind of became this mix. I had been told by a friend of mine very early on, if you can pick a common thread that you can carry across multiple genres, you can get the readers to come along for the ride. So in my case, I use suspense. If you read my Wikipedia page, I think it defines it the best, but it calls me a suspense author who may incorporate elements of horror, may incorporate elements of sci-fi, of this, of that. But that common thread is there, which means the readers follow along. So at this point, I've kind of created, I guess, my own genre a little bit, which is probably like every author's dream, because I don't think any of us really want to get stuck writing the same thing over and over.
No, for sure. Anyway, so what's the common thread that you're finding that between all your books?
For me, it's suspense. Fourth Monkey was a thriller that I put out, but I included a few horror elements in it. But I kept that common thread of suspense going through all of it. I wrote a prequel to Dracula for Bram Stoker's family, but if you read it, it reads very much like a thriller. And that suspense thread is there. So it's always present. What I've learned, I got a call from an agent or my editor, I guess about 5 or 6 books in. He said, well, we just did some numbers, and it looks like your audience is women 45 and over. So we need you to write a book to target that particular audience. So I turned in a young adult book, because my general thinking was, if I've already got women 45 and over, I need to figure out how to get this group over here that's not reading me. So I started targeting younger readers, and then I brought them into the fold. So I basically use the books as a literary Pied Piper. I look for a hole in the market that I'm not filling. I write a book that actually targets that group, cognizant of the fact I have to keep suspense in there. And then just to bring those readers into the fold like a literary Pied Piper.
Now, you started off with a self-published book that sold well, that people are like Simon & Schuster shout to you. Is that correct?
Yeah, so I worked in the industry for a very long time, but I had no clue how to actually query agents. So I wrote the first book. I knew I had a good book, but I bought a list of agents from a friend of mine, an Excel spreadsheet, and literally sent them all the same "to whom it may concern" letter. I didn't look at any of their websites to see what their criteria was. Some of them want Times New Roman for a font, other ones want Arial, some want a Word document, other ones want a PDF. I didn't look at any of that. I sent them all the exact same thing. And surprisingly, I didn't get a whole lot of response. So I decided to go ahead and indie publish the book. But I made some conscious decisions at the get-go. I looked at what was out there and decided that my competition isn't indie authors. My competition is Random House. It's Simon & Schuster. It's the big guys. I'm competing against the books they're putting out. So I hired the best across the board. I hired cover designers, editors, formatters, narrators for the audiobook, and I mimicked a Random House release. So we put out the hardcover on a particular day with the ebook and audiobook. 6 months later, we rolled out the paperback, but I followed the model that they had been doing. I got really lucky. Stephen King read that first book before it was published, and he let me use some of his characters in it, which was a huge leg up. When word of that got out, that's what really kindled the sales beneath that title. It ended up selling on a really decent number on a worldwide basis. I also struck a deal with the folks behind Kindle, where it was preloaded on Kindle in a bunch of different countries. So when you bought a Kindle, it was actually on there when you bought it. So it was a cost leader for me because I was basically giving away a free book, but I gave it away to a lot of people. So that just basically bumped up my numbers. So when I wrote the second book, The Fourth Monkey, and my agent started querying people on that, I had no trouble getting a traditional publishing deal.
That's great.
So
You got
that's
a really pragmatic approach to it.
I've never even heard of that idea of getting it preloaded onto Kindles. So you had to contact Amazon and work that out, I guess. Do you have to pay them?
No, I did it through, I did all of this in foreign countries. So there are a ton of countries where charities would buy Kindles, in bulk from Amazon. They would preload them with titles, and then they would give them to people who couldn't afford a Kindle. And got them hooked on reading and got them into that. So I was basically giving all of those people free books, but it now I'm in 150 different countries, almost 30 languages. And I think that's in large part because I had, done that to begin with. My name just spread in a lot of places where it normally wouldn't get.
That's really interesting. I've never even heard of that idea, but that's great. Especially that would work really well when you have a big catalog, because you're building up those readers. Somebody who does it as it's their only book, it may not help as much, but when you have other books they can go find, that's a great idea. Wow. And then so when you said Stephen King read your first book before it was published, how did that happen?
I've got my wife to thank for that. So in the book, I had to explain where the wife in the story buys a journal. So just to get the draft done, I wrote that she walked into Needful Things, Stephen King's store, and bought it there, and fully expected to have to change that on the rewrite, because you can't just do that sort of thing without a whole bunch of lawyers jumping down your throat. But I told my wife about it. She read it, and she's like, "No, you know what? Let's try to get his permission before you do anything drastic." Turns out he had a house in Florida that's about 10 minutes from my mom's house in Florida. So we were down there for a visit. We printed up the manuscript, hopped in the rental car, and figured, well, we'll head over to Steve's house. We'll catch him outside gardening or something. I'll hand him the manuscript. He'll give me a big thumbs up, and we'll be on our way by lunchtime. It didn't play out that way. So King lives on a little island off the coast called Casey Key. You go over a little bridge, and if you make a left, you go to the public portion of this island. So the bars, the restaurants, the hotels. If you make a right, you literally hit the entire half of the island that Stephen King owns. There's immediately a private drive sign, a no trespassing sign. We hit a gate and then another gate. We got about a half mile down what was either a road or his driveway. We were never actually able to figure it out. I'm watching the trees thinking a sniper is going to take us out if we go any further. And I figured, well, we better just turn around. So we turned around, we went to a little restaurant, got some lunch, and I called a friend of mine who knew King really well, a guy named Dallas Mayer. He passed away a few years ago, but really smart guy, worked in the industry for a long time. I told him what we were doing, and he said, "Oh yeah, don't stalk Steve. He hates that. Here's his email address. Just email him the book. If he likes it, he'll get back to you. If the book is shit, he probably won't reply." So I did that, and about 2-3 days later, I got an email back from King. He basically said, I love this. Go ahead and use the reference. Let me know if you need anything. And I stared at that for a couple of days, waiting for the retraction. I meant this for Grisham, not you. Sorry. But he never, he never retracted it. He let me do that. And I found over the years, I've gotten to know a lot of these big name authors. They all remember what it was like to be there with that first book and how difficult it is to break out. And they will reach a hand back anytime they possibly can to help somebody out, for the most part.
That's great. You'd think he'd get so inundated with people sending him manuscripts that I would think that he'd be like, I'm not reading that other one. But,
It's one of those things. I think I caught him on a good day, probably. I came in through a channel that was a little different from the norm, for him. But he's a very, very nice guy. I send him all the books that I write, and I had one a few years ago that I sent it through Amazon to his house, and I got a phone call from the Amazon driver, and he's like, "It's pouring rain out here. I've got to leave it at the gate." So I'm thinking, here's a book, in a box. It's getting completely destroyed by the rain. So I emailed King really quick and told him he was out there. He got on a raincoat and umbrella, went out there with his dog and got it, to basically rescued a book from, imminent death. He's just a really, really nice guy. I mean, I've hit him up over the years for advice on the business side and things like that. And he's always been there.
Wow. That's great. I mean, it's great to hear that the big names still want to help out the little guys. So what we wanted to talk to you about, and we're sort of touching on a lot of it here anyway, is the idea of the global launch, right? Which is something that so most of our audience are self-publishers, so it's not necessarily something that they're used to doing. A lot of us just publish on Amazon, and that does go to other countries for the Kindle at least version. But the idea of really thinking about your launch globally, especially when you're doing a paperback or whatever, there's a lot of pieces that have to go into that. And it sounds like you've got a lot of that worked out already. So what do you do at this point now? And, I guess some of that probably won't be always relevant to indie publishers, but some of it might be. So maybe we can, step through that process a bit.
Yeah, I mean, I tend to start a lot of these interviews with a little caveat. Like I've been at this as a full-time author for 11 years. If you go back 11 years, I had 0 books out there, 0 people on the mailing list. Nobody knew who I was. I've been very consistent about building brand and just bringing people, reader after reader after reader into the fold, which is something I think any author can do. I've kind of worked in both worlds. I indie published that first title, sold a ton of copies. That got me a 7-figure deal on my second title. With a movie and a TV show attached. So I did a couple of traditional titles after that. But because I had gotten a taste of being an indie author and all the, the control that you have over putting out your own book, you get to pick your own covers, you get to name your own book. A lot of these things get taken away from you, when you sell it in the traditional world. The economics of it, as an indie author, you get about 70 cents on the dollar. You're lucky if you get 15 to 20 cents on the dollar on a traditional contract. They may hand you a nice big check, but you've got to pay that back and you've got to sell a lot of books in order to do it. So I saw all of that. And I got about 4 or 5 books in, and I called my agent, and she was shopping the book through the traditional publishers. And I said, I'm going to publish this in English on my own, domestically through my own press, and you can go ahead and sell to the foreign publishers. So I had mentioned I'm in a number of different countries. So she did that. I published in English. And I really liked that because it kind of gave me the best of both worlds for a little while there. But I still ran into the same problem I think most indie authors do. There were places I just couldn't get. I couldn't get into the airport bookstores. I couldn't get into Target, Costco, the grocery stores, pharmacies, the places where people, really discover new authors because they're standing in line and the books are right there next to them at the counter. So I guess about 2 years ago, I was, this problem was always in the back of my mind. My agent was shopping a book I had coming out called Behind a Closed Door. We immediately got a film deal on it, which meant the publishers were lining up to get it. And I got a phone call from a friend of mine at Random House, and she said, "We're about to offer on your book, and when that offer comes in, you need to turn it down." And I asked her why, and she said, "Well, we're about to lay off a bunch of people, and the editor who wants to buy your book is on that list." And about 3 weeks later, all these editors got laid off at all the big publishers. So I took a step back. I used to work in finance. My last real job, I was a chief compliance officer at a brokerage firm. I had heard that Simon & Schuster had recently gotten bought by a private equity firm. So I reached out to friends that I had worked with in finance, and I struck up a conversation with Simon & Schuster. And ultimately, we decided on basically a new business model. They allowed me as an indie author to create my own imprint at Simon & Schuster. So I basically foot the bill as a publisher, just like any other author would when I do a print run. But Simon & Schuster handles my print sales and distribution for me, which means now I can get into all these places I couldn't get to before. And the economics are phenomenal because when I print a hardcover, I'm not printing it at Ingram Spark anymore. I'm printing it through Simon & Schuster, who's got a lot of power with the printers. So I'm getting those books done for a very, very low cost. So, in today's world, I can get those books into those various stores that I couldn't before. This isn't something that every indie author out there could do, but if an indie author has a decent track record, good sales numbers behind him, I think that this is honestly where the future of this business is going. Because if you take a step back and you look at, Random House, HarperCollins, these big guys, they're running into a problem because, years ago they would, they'd sign a contract with a debut author, for 5 or 6 books. They'd nurture that author, they keep them around, they help them build a reputation, build them sales. Today's world, they don't do that. If your book doesn't sell, out of the gate, you're lucky if you get a 1 or 2 book contract, and then they're done with you. They move on to the next one. So they've got this stable of authors that sell really well, but they're all aging out. They're all in their late 60s or in their 70s, they're in their 80s. They haven't replenished that stock behind them, and they're not quite sure how to do it. So I think Simon & Schuster, by doing this, being a private equity firm, they looked at that company as not a publisher anymore. They looked at it as a business that's got these particular parts that can do these particular things, and that's how this deal that I created with them came about. So I think you're going to get folks like Penguin Random House. They're going to do the same thing. They're going to go to an indie author. They're going to say, well, we can give you a check for X dollars, for your book, but you can come on board with your own publishing house. We'll handle all these things for you. We'll basically let you leverage our business. We work together on this as a partnership instead of you just being a hired hand, being an author. I think you're going to see a lot more of these, I guess, is what I'm getting at.
Yeah, that makes sense. A lot of the traditional publishers now are struggling with, a lot of things. And I guess the idea that they can lower some of their financial risk and put it on the backs of the authors is probably ideal.
Yeah, but it's kind of happening anyway. So if you're one of the big publishers and you go to an indie author who's selling really well and say, here's $1 million for your next book, that indie author is probably going to turn them down because they know they can make that $1 million and more without the headache of having to deal with this person on the other side telling them what to do. But you go to that same author and say, well, you can stay in control, you can do your own thing, and you can use our distribution model, our print sale, like our entire backbone. That's a game changer. I think it takes indie authors to the next level.
Yeah,
absolutely.
Not
that's
all
the missing
authors,
part,
right?
isn't it?
It is, yeah, and I see a lot of this business heading in that direction because if somebody like Random House, if they don't change what they're doing, they keep doing status quo, they're going to be in real trouble in a couple of years.
Yeah, and I think it will work for an indie author that is selling well, but I guess for the newer ones or ones that sort of haven't figured out how to find their audience yet, they're not going to get that kind of a deal from a big traditional.
No, not at all. You've got to prove yourself.
Yeah.
But this business is no different than any other business. If you want to get discovered, I think there's a couple things you have to have. You have to have a solid 5-star read, I think, out of the gate, because that's what you're competing with. I've seen people publish some really, really good books, but they're not great books. And with a really good book, you can put a lot of money behind Amazon ads and Facebook ads, and you can carry the sales for a little while. But the second you turn off those ads, the book sales dry up and nobody is talking about it. But if you write a 5-star read, the kind of book where somebody picks it up and they tell 3 or 5 of their friends about it, that's what carries it. I've seen that with my Fourth Monkey series. Like that book has been out for almost 10 years. We put $0 behind it from a marketing standpoint, but it's still hitting bestseller lists all around the world, strictly on word of mouth. It just got optioned for the 4th time by Sylvester Stallone's company, Balboa Productions, to do a streaming series. And it's word of mouth that got it there. It's just people are buzzing about it. If you go on Goodreads, you go on Reddit, it's one of those books and series that people talk about. So I think as an author, I know it's impossible. You can't sit down and say, I'm going to write this book that's going to create buzz, but that is what you need to do.
Yeah, having that in mind as a goal for sure.
Yeah.
So when you went at the beginning, you basically had this plan, and if let's say that the Stephen King thing hadn't happened, you still, I guess, had a plan of what you were going to do to market this. And is that sort of the plan you still rely on now. It becomes easier, obviously, when you have a following, right? You have a mailing list, you have fans. As soon as you release a book, those people are going to be buying it, and there's enough of them that it's going to push you, as you're seeing, to the bestseller list. But when you don't have that, you definitely need an even more concrete plan about how you're going to go about it, how you're going to be how you're going to get seen against the just endless wave of books that is released, every day, right? So yeah. How can authors that don't have sort of the following yet, what are some of the things that they can do to get seen and get out and be able to sort of take advantage of some of these things we're talking about?
Well, to give you some numbers, and I'm sure everybody's got different numbers for this, but from what I've heard, last year there were 4 million books published on Amazon. 600,000 of those were traditionally published titles. The rest were indie authors, and a good chunk of that was AI generated. So that's essentially your competition. Your book is coming out. Your book is one out of that 4 million. So you have to figure out how to stand out. Something that I do with every book that could work for every author, I give away a ton of them to anybody who's got any kind of platform. If they've got 100 or more followers on Instagram, I will send them a free book. Cost me $5 to put it in their hands. You can't beat the advertising that you get from somebody doing that. I put them all on NetGalley, which is a lot of authors don't use NetGalley. The traditional side does. But what that does is your book goes out there to reviewers specifically. They get your book for free. They get out there, they talk about it on their platform, and when your campaign is over, they let you download the email list of everybody who downloaded your book. So when I get that list, I take it and I put it into my MailChimp account, into my mail program, and add it to my list of book reviewers. So the next time I have a book title coming out, those people get notified that I've got a new title coming out, and then I add the next round of NetGalley readers and reviewers to it, and that list just gets bigger and bigger every time of nothing but people that do nothing but shout out about books. I hired a publicist. I've been doing that for years and years. Initially, I hired one that a friend of mine had recommended. It was a really big firm up in New York. I gave him a $20,000 retainer because I didn't know any better. And that first month, they came back to me and they got me like 2 blog reviews and like one little website, like literally nothing for $20,000. So I figured that's not going to work. So in today's world, I do everything on an a la carte basis. I've got a list of publications. I've got a list of websites, a list of podcasts, including yours. And there's a price tag on there. So if that publicist, gets that particular media outlet for me, they get paid whatever dollars are on that spreadsheet. So a publicist can come in, they can, if they work really hard, they make a lot of money. If they don't work hard at all, they don't make anything. But I pay them based on performance, and I kind of do that with everybody across the board. So that tends to be very different from what most authors do. But the one thing I think that's really served me best this entire time, whenever I have a new book coming out, I look at what other authors are doing to promote their titles, and I'll create a list of that, and then I try to come up with something that's not on that list, something completely outside the box to push my title. To give you an example, last year I had a book coming out called Something I Keep Upstairs. It was a haunted house story, but the house in the story was real. I live on a little island in New England, and that house is literally a half mile off the coast of where I live. So as part of the promotion for that book, I gave away an overnight stay in the real haunted house at the basis of my book. So to launch that, I put out a press release, which cost me about $500 through a company that does that. Basically telling the world, this author is giving away an overnight stay in the haunted house at the basis of his book. That went out to all the media outlets. So my phone lit up, with newspaper reviews and radio and television. I did a ton of press, talking about this thing. People got online and there was tons of buzz. I'll do it. Well, you do it. I'll do it if you do it. They were all talking about it. All of this was essentially free, and all of it led to pre-orders. All of it led to sales. So whenever I have a new book coming out, I look for that one thing that nobody's doing or nobody's ever done to sell that book. Now, the problem there is it only works once. If you write a haunted house book tomorrow and decide you're going to give away an overnight stay in your haunted house, that's not going to get you the kind of traction that I got because it's already been done. So you have to be creative. You have to come up with something that nobody's done yet.
Yeah, that's a great idea. I mean, I haven't, like you said, it hasn't been done, so I guess that's why I hadn't heard of it. But yeah, I think that's one of those things that a lot of people are trying to figure out is what can I do to stand out that everyone isn't doing? And as you said, it takes some creative thought to come up with it. And the press release is something that I think a lot of indie authors don't really do. And I think the reason why not just the cost, I mean, it's not a huge cost when you look at you're probably spending more than that on editing your book and cover design and all that stuff, right? But I think what a lot of the people do is just put out that press release saying, hey, there's a new book, and that's not going to do anything, really. I mean, like those press releases come out every day, and if you're a nobody, I don't know how many people are really going to do anything with that press release other than some sites that would be reposting press releases. But when you do something like that, it stands out. All of a sudden everyone starts talking about it, and I think that's the key that people need to do, is like, okay, don't just put out a press release, figure out what is going to make people pay attention to that press release.
Well, you have to look at it as a business, as a brand. You're selling a widget. Forget that it's a book. It could be a banana, it could be a glass, it could be a car. You're selling a product, and in order to sell that product, you need name recognition. And in order to get name recognition, you have to get your name out there. So I do a lot of press releases. I do a lot of things that just generate, buzz. And the thinking behind that, and we've all heard this before, like somebody, if they see your name once, chances are they're not going to remember it. They see it 4 or 5 times and it starts getting embedded in their subconscious. So what happens in my case is they're walking down the book aisle one day in Walmart. They see one of my books up there and the name jumps out at them, and they don't remember where they saw it or how they saw it or, the logic behind it. But it's familiar to them, and that's enough for them to pick up the cover and hopefully get them to pull the trigger on that. Unfortunately, what I see happen with a lot of indie authors is they look at what every other author is out there doing, and they do the exact same things. The Facebook ads, the Amazon ads, give away the first one in the series, to hopefully get people to buy the rest of the series. Like all these things, every indie author is out there doing that, and that's fine. But it basically means you're never going to exceed past that group. If you're not doing something different from the group, at best you're going to hit the ceiling with the best of them, but you're never going to excel beyond it. You have to come up with something completely different that's going to take you off into a different realm.
This is amazing advice. I was just going to say, like, if you're listening to this right now, then pay attention, because I think JD's onto something.
Absolutely. And I think really what the hard part for people will be trying to figure that out, figure out what it is that will make them stand out that hasn't been done before,
It's really hard because as authors, I think one of the reasons we like being authors is because we're introverts, right? We like sitting behind the desk all by ourselves, talking to the people in our head. Last thing we want to do is pick up the phone and start doing the marketing side of things. And unfortunately, in today's world, you have to do it. Like I write a lot of books with James Patterson. He's probably the biggest author in the world, but he's still completely hands-on with every marketing thing going on with his books. He product tests everything. He does A and B testing on the covers. He's got focus groups on the titles. Every ad that you see on television or on the radio or any that you see in print, he stamped that with his own approval. Like these are all his ideas. And I think for me anyway, I mean, I'm lucky enough to have the guy on the phone a couple of times a week. Like I feed off of that energy. I pick his brain about the business side just as much as I do the writing side. But I've seen it with every it doesn't matter like what industry you're in. Like the people that tend to rise to the top, they all have that particular. It's like an entrepreneur mindset. They look well beyond what they're actually producing, and they look at everything else around them and try to find some way to stand out. And if you look, you can see it. Even influencers, like they're able to do that. Some people just they gravitate towards how do I make myself different? How do I get beyond the masses so other people notice me? It's very difficult. It's getting harder and harder to do, but there's plenty of authors out there I think that are able to do it.
It's really nice and reassuring to hear that James Patterson is so hands-on with that, because I think, like, I love Lee Child, and now Lee Child is writing the books with his brother or something, and there's always this suspicion of like, is that magic going to go away? So it's nice to hear that James is like as deeply involved in this as it goes.
I pick on Lee Child all the time because his name's not Lee Child. If you go to his Wikipedia page, you can get the whole story there. But he was just like every other author. He was writing books under different pen names. All of a sudden the Jack Reacher book took off, and he got stuck on that hamster wheel that I mentioned at the beginning. He had to write a new Jack Reacher book year after year after year, and it may not be what he wants to write. Maybe he wants to write it this year, but maybe not next year. But at some point when you're generating that kind of money, you don't get to make that decision. I think he brought his brother in so that he could take a step back, and I'm really hoping he's sitting on the the porch right now on his ranch writing the book he actually wants to write.
He moved to Wyoming, which is my dream.
Yeah, I mean, I always thought he just wanted to retire. I mean, at some point you get to a level of success and you think, now it's time to enjoy what I've earned over my life.
Very few authors, I mean, the ones that I've seen really succeed, like I write every day because I have to, you know, it's not because I want to, but like, it's like, there's something in me that forces me to write. If I don't do it, I start getting twitchy. Like I was doing it for free long before people started paying me for it as an outlet. I think a lot of authors are that way. And like, I've known very few authors who actually retire. Yeah, they tend to just keep going and going and going.
Yeah, I heard an expression which I love, which is rats have to gnaw on wood all the time because otherwise their big incisors will keep growing till they literally pierce their skull and go through their heads. And they say writers are just the same way with writing.
That's true. And like when I run into that writer at a conference that says, you know, I hate the writing part, but you know, and they start going into the you know, they want the flip side. They want the sales, they want the recognition, they want all that, but they, you know, putting themselves in a desk and actually creating the book is the part they hate. And like if you don't have a love for it, like this is a tough business, you know, to begin with. You know, you really need to have a passion for it.
Yeah, it's not necessarily a business you should get into just to make money, thinking that, you know, oh, I'll just be a writer. Usually the people that want to write are because they want to write. And it's the marketing side of it. That's what we always hear. The marketing side of it is what everyone hates. Although it sounds like that might not be the case with you. It sounds like you're sort of like really into that. I
like the challenge of it. I like looking at it going, well, how can I do something a little different? You know, how can I make some noise? You know, to me, that part's fun. But yeah, no, I'm different when it comes to that. Most authors don't want any part of this.
Yeah, it's a different mindset, right? It's you know, right. Some people are just the business side of it is not at all what they're interested in. When they got into writing, even if they never were traditionally published, that model was always sort of like what we, I mean, at our age, at least, what we grew up with knowing is like, oh, you know, you write your book and you give it to your publisher and then they take care of everything, right? But self-publishing has changed all that. And I think people are still sort of wrapping their heads around that even, you know, 15 years later, where we're kind of like, you know, I still don't really want to do all that other stuff. I just want to write. And it has allowed a lot more people to write. But I think, you know, we're seeing how a lot of authors, you know, they can get published where before that gatekeeper was there keeping them from it. But that doesn't mean they're achieving the success they thought they would get, because now everything after that falls on them, and then that's where they sort of let it slip. And that's usually sort of what we're trying to help people with this podcast is, you know, we don't talk as much about the writing side of it. I mean, we do in some episodes, but I think we talk more about the marketing side of it and the launching and all the strategies that go behind once you've written the book. Now, what do you do?
Yeah, you know, that's the tricky part, and it always has been. I think indie authors, you know, in a lot of ways, they're blessed because they, you know, get exposed to literally every aspect of the business. If you want to get your title out there, you have to understand formatting, you have to understand editing, you have to understand cover design, you know, what works in a marketplace, what doesn't work. You know, just something as simple as the keywords at Amazon. You know, if you talk to somebody on the, you know, an author that's strictly traditionally published, they don't necessarily know any of this stuff because they haven't had to. You know, a lot of them don't even own their own mailing list. The publisher, you know, like if they were with a publisher long enough, their publisher created their website, created their mailing list, and they own all that. So they can't even pick up and leave and go from publisher A to publisher B, you know, without losing their mailing list. So there, you know, there's a lot of handicaps there. But I think if you can tough through it as an indie author and you can understand all these different moving parts, I think it can really help you. You know, because like my very first publishing deal on the traditional side, when I got the marketing plan for The Fourth Monkey, it was from HMH, which is a part of HarperCollins now. But we had a marketing meeting. You know, they paid a lot of money for this book, which meant there was a marketing team behind it and a real plan. We watched the PowerPoint presentation, and like I was taking notes on the stuff they were not doing. You know, they weren't doing BookBub. They weren't doing Facebook ads. Like these weren't things that existed, you know, on the traditional side, you know, 8-9 years ago. And I basically went home and I did all those things. I didn't tell them I was doing it because I knew if I did, then they might offset it on their side with something else, you know, try and balance the scales a little bit. But I always punched holes in the marketing plans of the traditional publishers. And I did what I saw indie authors doing that they weren't doing yet. I always think of traditional publishers as being like a big cruise ship in the middle of a harbor. You know, they can turn that boat around if they have to, but an indie author is much like a speedboat. just zipping around. We can do laps around that boat. If somebody hears something on this podcast, right now, they can go back to their desk as an indie author and they can implement it before the business day is out. That doesn't happen on the traditional side, and that allows you to basically guerrilla market. You can get ahead of the big guys. But what I'm also noticing is the traditional publishers are starting to encroach on a lot of the things the indie authors have been doing for years. Like if you get a BookBub and look at the list of books now, it's almost all traditional titles. If you go back 5 years ago, it was all indie titles. Facebook ads were all indie titles a couple of years ago. Now it's traditional, and they're pricing out a lot of the indie authors. They can't afford it anymore. So you got to look beyond what's working now and try to figure out what's working next. I'm doing a lot of television commercials for books, which is not something I see authors doing.
That's really interesting.
Yeah, and I agree. That's one of the things I always loved about writing, but also about sort of having my own business and whatever, is if I wake up with an idea today, I can implement it, good or bad. But when I used to work at Oracle, and I was a product manager. This was going back 20 years. And, that was the thing that frustrated me, is like, if you had an idea and you wanted to do it, there was so much red tape, so many things you had to do, so many hoops to jump through, that it would take forever. And that I couldn't take that. And it's the same, like you said, with the traditional publishing. And that's why, they're playing catch up now, which is great, I think. They're like, oh, what are you guys doing? Oh, we're going to copy that. But they still have that slowness built into them. So even if, all of a sudden the indie, world sort of discovers some new thing, they will probably copy it, but it'll still take them some time to do it. It's not like they'll be able to jump on it tomorrow.
Yeah, I mean, you have to look at every aspect of this business too. I don't know if you guys can see it, but the book cover for my next book is right behind me on the side here. And a couple elements on there, like I paid for the cover design, which means I own that image. So I license that image back to my foreign publishers. So rather than creating their own cover, they pay me to use this cover. My name on the cover is written in a particular font that's actually trademarked, but that's the brand recognition that I talked about earlier. People recognize my name written in that particular format. So it's worth more money to the publisher to actually put it on the cover in that font, but they can't just do it because I own the trademark on it. They have to actually license it from me. So for them to duplicate this cover in their language, they have to license the image, they have to license my name. And I do that across the board for all my different books. And, it's small dollars, when you think about it, like they may pay me $500 for the image, but this is across a lot of publishers. So those things add up. But I look at every element involved in the publishing industry, and if I'm not making money on it, I try to find a way to turn it into a revenue center.
That's awesome. Another thing, I've never heard of people doing, and I think that's a great idea. And it's not something that I think comes naturally, again, because most authors aren't that business oriented. We're not thinking about, I can take my cover and now license it out. Like if somebody said to me, and I've paid for all my covers in the past too, but if I sold my rights to a publishing company, I would never even have thought to charge them to use the cover.
Well, and here's the thing though, they may ask you for the cover, but they're not going to offer you money for the cover. Right. But if you push back and say, well, I'll let you license it, when they ask to use it, they will most likely say yes. Right. Because we're in a very global market. When you're running ads on Facebook and Amazon and all these different places online, it helps to use that same image, on a worldwide basis, for that same brand recognition.
Yeah, and I mean, it's money on the table that why leave it there if you don't have to?
I mean, I came at this from a very weird place. I mean, I was working in investment banking and finance. So I saw a lot of companies that basically went from an idea scribbled on a napkin at a bar, to a public IPO 3 or 4 years later. And I saw everything that happened in between. And I saw a lot of the same patterns over and over again, and it was all about building brand for that particular product. And it didn't matter what the product was, but that formula for building brand was always the same. And I think that's kind of stuck with me through the years, and I've just applied it here.
One thing that I've noticed, which is quite interesting, is I experimented with moving my books from Amazon and doing direct sales. So I have my own landing page. So I would be running ads for my books, pointing directly to my landing page, having nothing to do with Amazon at all. But I noticed when I was running ads for my direct sales page, my Amazon sales would double or increase And that must be the branding and the name awareness. People see your books, they see the covers, they get them in their brain, and when they're on Amazon, boom, they actually go and find them, even though I'm not pointing people there at all.
Yeah, I mean, like I mentioned that I do television commercials. So one of the things that allows you to do is you can create a pixel for the television spots and put it on your website, which means they can track, if somebody just saw this commercial and they click on your website, 3 minutes later, they can make that correlation to tell you how much traffic is coming from a TV spot going over to your website. I can tell you when I run a TV commercial, virtually nobody goes to my website. For when it comes to books are an anomaly. So like if you put a book in front of somebody and they decide they want to buy it, they're going to go to their, typical place where they buy books. So for some people that's Amazon. For other people, they go to Barnes & Noble. Other people will go to the local bookstore. But they all have their set place where they like to buy books. You can't really tell them where to go. And it's the same thing with like direct sales. I think it's great that you're able to do that because I know the profit margins are great, but somebody who, likes to buy books on Amazon, they're probably not going to buy books direct. But, other people may purposely go to your site and buy direct because they don't want to buy from Amazon. So the more formats, the more methods you can have out there, the better, because you're hitting all these different groups. Pricing is a very similar thing too. Like if authors tell me all the time that I should have my books in Kindle Unlimited. And I have all of my books in Kindle Unlimited. Because what I found over the years is some people, like, that is how they enjoy their books. And if I take my books out of Kindle Unlimited, they're not going to go over here and buy them from the bookstore just because they're not here anymore. They're going to find another author they like that's in Kindle Unlimited, and they're going to forget about me. So I try to get my books in all the different places, as many different spots as I possibly can to satisfy all those different buying opportunities.
That's great. Like a lot of,
Craig and I had that exact conversation today.
Yeah, like a lot of traditionally published authors aren't doing KU, or they weren't, at least at the beginning. Now I've been reading some articles about how a lot of them are starting to move there. And I know at the beginning there was, I don't know if that's the case with you, but there was these sweetheart deals being offered by Amazon where it's like, most of us get stuck with a half a cent a page sort of payout, where they were giving, some of the traditional publishers a better, I don't know if it was a better rate or from a different sort of fund. And that was to try to entice them, because they're like, oh, I'm selling this book for $8.99, and now I'm going to get a dollar or two if I put it in KU. I don't really like that deal. So, but the volume, I think, is what makes up for it.
Yeah, I mean, a lot of the traditional publishers, they're not hampered by that exclusivity thing either. They can have their books in Kindle Unlimited, and they can have it an ebook over here at Barnes & Noble. That's part of the deal. I think authors have to just take a step back and look at all those different things. Even like the pricing model. I know so many indie authors that say, well, I'm an indie author, I have to price at $2.99. I have to price at $3.99. I price all my Kindle books way up here, because that's where the traditionally published titles are. And I've got some books that are traditional, some that are indie, but all of mine are priced at that point. So anywhere between $10 and $15 for an ebook. And they still sell because, like, that, the people that buy books at that price point are there. They come for it. Sometimes if you sell an ebook too low, people will actually discount it. They'll look at that price and they'll say, well, that's probably an indie author. There's probably a reason that's lower. It's almost a negative. So you would have to sell a lot more books in order to get, that one sale up here at $10. So there's a lot of different things you can do that you've got to tweak. And I think every author really needs to approach it, from their own standpoint, try all these different things, figure out what works specifically for them, because what works for you is not going to necessarily work for you. It's different for everybody.
Yeah, absolutely.
That is fun. Unfortunately, we are approaching the top of the hour, which, to be honest, I think we could talk to you for another hour quite happily. So maybe you'd be kind enough to come back, because I think people are going to find what you've been saying so fascinating and different and outside of the box. But before we wrap up, JD, where can people find your books and find you? I mean, it sounds like you've made them as available as you possibly can, but where would you like people to go to find out more about you?
Yeah, I mean, the easiest place to find anything on me is jdbarker.com. I'm on all the social medias at jdbarker. And the books can be found at pretty much every bookstore. The next title coming out is The First Scarlet Door, and that comes out in September.
Fantastic. Well, we will make sure to pop a link to that down in the description of this video. So whether you're watching on YouTube or listening on Spotify, scroll down there, click on that link and go and check out JD's stuff. And at the same time, you'll pass that big empty comment section. So make sure you leave JD a comment and let him know how much you've appreciated everything he shared with us today. Some of it, I think, was real gold, actually. I think you got such an interesting viewpoint on how to approach marketing your books that is very different to what people think. So we really appreciate you sharing that with us. And yeah, there's also that subscribe button if you haven't already, that bell icon you can click to get notified every time there is a new episode of Fully Booked. And of course, there will be a new episode of Fully Booked next week. So until then, cheerio. And JD, thank you so much for giving us your time and attention.
Oh, thanks for having me, guys. I had a lot of fun. Appreciate it.
Thank you.